Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Generic Garage. On today's episode, we are back on the Ford Shogun. It's been a little bit since I uploaded the last video, and I want to assure everybody that I haven't just been sitting around doing nothing. So, here's what I've been up to. Summertime is here in San Antonio, Texas, and for those of you that don't know, that means that we're going to be getting 100+ degree weather pretty much every single day for the next couple of months, which means that this garage was going to be incredibly hot. So to combat that, I installed a split unit. Now it's a nice 75 degrees in here. So thanks to that and the fact that I insulated the garage door, we can now work in here in comfort without exhausting ourselves and sweating like crazy. I also took a trip to Alabama. There was a gentleman who posted a Ford Festiva on Craigslist and it happened to have air conditioning. I wanted the air conditioning. So I used my Southwest points and I got myself a flight to Alabama, picked up a super cheap rental car, drove about 2 hours and picked up all of the AC components here for the car. I've got the condenser, the evaporator, the blend door, the blower. I even got the little unit that goes on the dash with the little AC button. Kind of hard to find these days. Also on that Festiva was the rear spoiler. This was kind of a rare add-on that you would order on the car from the dealership and they would just kind of screw it into the back hatch here. I know that there are a couple people that still make these. They're fiberglass molds and I think I might try to do that myself. Try to clean this up real nice, make a nice mold of it and get to the point where I can actually start producing these things. Aside from that, I grabbed a new front grille. It's a little bit different than the old 89 grille. I think the Festiva was a 90 or a 91, so slight difference, but this one is broken, this one is not, and I think this one will look really nice on the car. The engine in the front of the car is gone. I took it out. I put it over there. I do not know what to do with it. I can make a go-kart out of it. I could sell it if somebody needs the motor and transmission. Leave me a comment down below. So now that the front of the car is emptied out and we are down to one engine, it was time to figure out what to do with the front suspension. On the last video, I mentioned that if we kept everything the same on the front, we'd end up with a 5-lug pattern in the back for the wheels and a 4-lug in the front. I hit up Adam Hennessy and he told me, hey, you just use the same spindles, the same knuckles from the Taurus. That way you end up with the same bolt pattern, same brakes, same knuckles, same suspension components all the way around the vehicle. So I ordered a couple of those from Show Source, and one of them is hanging on the vehicle now. Now, the issue that I ran into, well, there's actually more than one. So to start off with, the shock mounts up on top here are from a Kia Rio, early 2000s. The cool thing about these is they have bearings built into them. Here are the old strut and spring combos off the front of the Festiva. You can see in here, the only bearing that they had was this little thrust washer plate. And whatever this material is, it kind of feels like brake pad material, clutch material, something that might be oil impregnated. It's a little slippery and it sits on that washer and that goes in there. And then all of that sits on the strut and allows it all to rotate whenever you articulate the steering. So definitely an upgrade going to the Kia Rio mounts up top with that integrated bearing. The next item to deal with was going to be springs, so I figured let's just do the same thing that we did on the rear suspension. We have the same knuckles, we have the same struts. Let's grab 2 of the same kits that we used for the coilover conversion. We'll grab the same springs but with a lower spring rate. We'll make new assemblies for the front. So I grabbed some 10-inch, 150-pound spring rate springs and got to work assembling all of this. Now, when I tried to put it on the car, I found out that those 10-inch springs were just too long. So I ended up having to order some 8-inch springs. These are 125-pound per inch springs, same diameter as the old springs. We're gonna test these on the car today and hopefully all of that fits in there. It was trying to push the lower control arm down way too low in the vehicle and everything was kind of binding up and getting real tight. So some shorter springs should help. The next item to deal with is going to be tie rod ends. I have 4 new tie rod ends, 2 for the front and 2 for the back, but the tie rod ends that fit into these knuckles do not thread on to the steering rack there, so I have to figure out how to adapt those. After that, the next issue is the lower control arm ball joints. Now you're supposed to use the factory Ford Festiva lower control arms. and they have integrated ball joints in them. You cannot remove them, you cannot replace them. Everything comes as an assembled unit and is swaged in there, and you will never be able to replace those ball joints. That wouldn't be an issue except for the ball joints on the Ford Festiva are 5/8 in diameter, and the hole for the knuckles that come on the Ford Taurus Show are a little bit bigger than that. I want to say they're about 17.5 millimeter or maybe 11/16 in diameter. So we had a big gap, and the knuckle was sitting there just kind of rocking back and forth on the lower control arm. To combat that, we need to make some shim sleeves. Nobody makes a 5/8 to 11/16 shim sleeve. So I bought some 5/8 by 3/4, put them on the drill press, and used that in combination with some sandpaper as a sort of lathe, and ground down the outside diameter of the shim sleeves. I ended up at about a 0.7 inch, that's 7/10 of an inch outside diameter. So now we have one shim sleeve that is 5/8 ID by 0.7 OD by 1 1/8 inch long shim sleeves. And those hold the new control arm in there perfectly. Everything's in there, it's nice and tight, feels really smooth, it's not going to fall out. The pinch bolt fits in there perfectly. Everything is all good. So we're gonna have to make another one of those for today. Another fun little project that we're gonna have to deal with is the lower control arm bolts and nuts. The nut is captured inside of the frame rail by a sort of cage that is spot welded to the inside of the frame. Now, when I went to undo the bolt for the lower control arm, that nut started to spin. Apparently it had broken the little cage that goes around the nut and was just spinning freely in there. So I had to drill 2 holes inside of the frame and shove a flathead screwdriver in there to keep the nut from spinning before I was able to actually back out that bolt. I ordered 2 new lower control arms for the Festiva, and in order to get those in, I have to take those bolts out. Now I have a strange sneaking suspicion that the exact same thing is gonna happen on this side, so I'm probably gonna end up having to drill 2 holes, shove a flathead screwdriver in there to keep the nut from spinning, and then take that bolt out. That means that we need to find a way to hold those nuts back in place. I don't know if I'm gonna cut a bigger hole in there so that I can fit the welder in there and maybe tack those nuts to the frame, or if we're gonna find some other way of being able to capture those nuts again, and then, I don't know, maybe patch the holes or put a removable cover plate on there, something. I have to figure out something for that. The last big issue that I've been trying to solve for the past month has been to find a set of wheels for the Shogun. The original wheels for the prototype Shogun were 16 inches in the rear and 15 inches in the front, but for the 7 production vehicles, they switched over to 17-inch wheels all the way around. So the fronts are supposed to be 17 inches in diameter by 8.5 inches wide with a positive 20 millimeter offset, and utilize the 5x108 lug pattern meant for the Ford Taurus Show. The same can be said for the rears, except for those are supposed to be 10 inches wide with a positive 25 millimeter offset. The wheels that are currently on here are not nearly as wide as the wheels that are supposed to be on here, but finding a match set like that is dang near impossible. I hit up multiple companies. Let's see here, I talked to VR Wheels, Love 20B, Fitment Industries, Wheel Pros for Kinesis Motorsports, Sensei 6, Rotiform, DriftShop.com, where I found JR Racing wheels that actually I can order those, and everything is exactly as I've specified here, but they are coming from Europe, so then there's VAT tax, and those are kind of lower end wheels. I hit up Jongblod Racing Wheels, Enkai Wheels, Augment Wheel Company, Koenig Wheels, Boyd Wheels, Chimero Boy 86, ESM Wheels, ESR Wheels, and another of other companies. Now the closest thing I can find here in the US is actually going to be from J&C Wheels. I did a bunch of research and looked up on the internet reviews and everything like that, and it turns out that, again, those are just knockoff replica wheels, and some people say they've had good luck with them, other people say that they've had really bad luck with them. So I'm kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I can get somebody to make me a really nice set of 3-piece wheels, but that's going to run me $3,500 to $4,500 just for the rims themselves. They're going to look really nice, they're going to have forged alloy components, they're going to be splittable so that I can replace the inner and outer drums. so on and so forth. Really nice wheels, but you know, let's just say $4,000 for that. Now the set of JNC wheels for the car is actually only gonna run me about $1,500. So I think what we're gonna do is just go ahead and order the set of JNC wheels for 1,500 bucks. We'll get those in here. The offset in the front will be off slightly, but that just means that the front's gonna be a little bit wider than the original Shoguns. Now, it's important for me to get the wheels for the vehicle because I need to 3D scan the entire car so that I know exactly how to design the body kit for the car. I didn't want to try to start designing the body kit for the car with the current wheels that are going to be on here for transportation purposes, because they just don't stick out as far as the wheels that are supposed to be on the car. So if I design the body kit to cover these wheels and then we get the new wheels which stick out to here, we're going to have an issue. So get the right wheels for the car, 3D scan the car, then I can design the body kit for the front, for the rear, for the lower panels down here, so on and so forth. So first up, we're gonna go ahead and make another bushing so that we can get the other control arm sitting on the knuckle, and then we can get the springs put on and get all of the suspension in the front put back up in place and go from there. right, so we have the suspension kind of put on the Festiva for right now. But during all of that, I had some thoughts. Now, it's been about 2 weeks since I recorded that little montage, and during that time, I've been thinking about better ways to spend the $1,500 instead of ordering those wheels. So here's the thought. $1,500 goes a long way towards actually getting the car running. That'd be a lot cooler, right? So instead of buying wheels for the thing and trying to make the body kit, let's actually get this thing running and driving, and we can take it to cruise night or cars and coffee or something like that, and maybe meet some people who are interested in the project and might have some insights as to how to do some things going forward. In order to get the car running, we need air, fuel, spark, brakes, and some sort of cooling system installed in the vehicle. Now, in order to get the fuel cell installed, I need to know how big of a fuel cell I can actually put in here. Maybe we can use the old Festiva tank, maybe not. The whole point of this is that the radiator goes up here, and in front of the radiator sits the condenser. So I need to put the condenser in, then the radiator, and then I need to leave room for some sort of a shroud that allows the air to come through the front end, go up, and escape out the hood over the top of the car. So ironically, the first part of getting the whole thing running is to figure out the AC condenser for the vehicle. Another part of that is to figure out the AC compressor, but we'll get to that in a second. When converting from an R12 system to an R134 system, you want to go from this sort of continuous style condenser to a parallel flow condenser. And what that means is, the old condensers that ran in R12, you had an input on one side and it would snake back and forth, left and right, one continuous tube throughout the condenser until it came out the other side. In an R134 system, it works better and it's more efficient with a parallel flow. So here you have an input, it runs all the way over to here through a certain section, and then comes down and runs all the way back through on this side, and that's a lot more efficient for the R134A cooling. I ordered that condenser. It's a universal condenser, and it should fit up in the front here. So we're not going to use the condenser from the Festiva, and we're not going to use the condenser from the Taurus Show. So we have the condenser kind of figured out, and we need to get that put in there. Then we have the original radiator and fan setup from the Ford Taurus Show, and that'll sit right in there. So condenser, radiator, shroud, and then we can take a measurement to see how much space we have left for fuel. Once the fuel is in there, we can run fuel lines back to the motor and figure out all of the fuel stuff back here. Moving on to this AC compressor, the AC compressor sits right there, and above that mounts the alternator. One of the sounds the Taurus was making when we were turning it over back in like the first or second video turned out to be the clutch on the AC compressor. This part over here just kind of exploded itself. So the way this works is you have a magnetic coil, and then you have your pulley that sits on the magnetic coil, just like this. And then you have this plate, and everything's metal. And when you turn on that coil, this thing is sprung just a little bit, and it's shimmed off away from the pulley. But when you turn on that coil, it magnetizes and pulls this plate onto the pulley and grabs it, allowing it to spin, turning the AC compressor. This is a 10P15F AC compressor, and these things are basically unobtainium. You cannot get these things anymore. You cannot do rebuild kits for these things. So hopefully this AC compressor is good. When I put the little doodad on here and spin it, it feels good. It feels like it's making pressure when I plug one end of the hose. I'm really just praying that this thing is good, because if this is bad, we're in a whole different world of trying to figure out another AC compressor setup and making brackets and maybe modifying some stuff to try to make everything work out. This one is a remanufactured compressor, so at some point in time, this was replaced. I don't know if I like that, or maybe it's actually better. Maybe it means that the original one failed, and more recently they got a remanufactured compressor for it, and then it just kind of sat around for a long time and didn't do a whole bunch of stuff, and so there's less miles on this thing. Now, I ordered like 2 or 3 different clutches for this thing because there's so much information on the internet about what fits and what doesn't fit, and after a couple of different clutches, I think I finally got the right one in. And the biggest difference is actually in the pulley that comes with the system. So you'll see here this pulley is really thick on this edge and it's really thin on this edge. On a couple of the other UAC kits or 4-season rebuild kits or remanufactured assemblies for these clutches, the thicker part is actually out here. So if you were to use the wrong one, essentially what's going to happen is you're going to have a big misalignment on your belt. But I think I finally got the right one. So got the AC, got the radiator, fan shroud we can figure out. Fuel cell, we'll probably shove the Festiva fuel tank in there. That gets that done. Stick the new compressor clutch on the compressor, put the alternator and all that back in there. And that's kind of that all wrapped up for now. Aside from that, we need brakes. So I have new brake hoses all the way around. It's just 2 sets of the left and 2 sets of the right since we're running the same knuckles and suspension on all 4 corners. So that's nice and easy. I have new discs, I have new calipers, all new brake hardware, everything like that is still in the mail. It should be here, I want to say in a couple days from now. Everything's coming from Rock Auto or Amazon or eBay. Okay, with all of those other systems figured out, we still need wheels for this thing. I can use the same wheels that I put on it for transportation in the rear. And then what I did is I ordered 2 more of those same rims, and then I took them over to discount and got some slightly smaller tires put on them so that everything would fit better up at the front. So exact same rim, smaller tire, and I have one of the ones off the back put on the front over here just to see how it would fit in there. And it turns out it's a little bit too big and it starts rubbing on the inside of the fender well. So hopefully some smaller tires on the same rims will work out. It's also hitting because I don't have the discs on here for the disc brake setup, so everything's kind of shoved in just a little bit. Once I put the discs on there, it'll be like spacing the wheel out by, I don't know, like 1/4 of an inch or so, and so hopefully that'll help. The last big problem I have to solve is one we talked about just a little bit earlier, and that is actually in these tie rod ends. Now, I spoke with Adam Hennessy again, and he said he had some boxes of Ford Escort tie rod ends laying around in his shop, and he was 99.9% sure those are the ones that fit on the knuckles and have the same threads that fit on the inner tie rods for the steering rack on the Festiva. It turns out, at least in my case, that the tapered end of the ball joints is actually different from the tapered hole in the knuckles. From what I understand, there's like 3 main styles of taper. There's a super narrow one, and then there's a common 7.125 degree taper, and then a slightly less common 9.46 degree taper. Both of them are commonly referred to as 7 degree and 10 degree. So the knuckles have the common 10 degree, and the ball joints that are on those Ford Escort tie rod ends are the 7.125 degrees, so the tapers are different. So I'm still kind of fighting that issue. The only other thought that I had for that was, why don't we replace the inner tie rods on the back end here from the original Taurus steering rack, and we can take the old tie rods, since those have the correct thread on them, and we can chop up the tie rods that are on the inside of the steering rack for the Festiva, and we can put those two together. So we'll have the inner tie rod half that fits on the steering rack for the Festiva, and then we'll have the outer part of the inner tie rod of the show welded to that. So I think what we want to do now is get one of the tie rods off from here, cut it, take one of the old ones off the back, and then cut it, and then weld them together, maybe with some sort of a tube or a sleeve to hold them centered to each other. And that way we have the correct thread that threads onto the steering rack over here, and we have the correct thread for the ball joint from the Ford Taurus show out here. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to put this compressor back together and get it put back on the vehicle, and then we'll move on to the tie rods from the front and the back and putting things together to try to make it such that we can put the tie rod ends from the Ford Taurus show onto the welded up sort of inner tie rods from the Festiva and the show put together. Yeah. Well, we got some custom tie rods made. Let's run through exactly what happened. So initially I had this DOM rod somewhere. There it is. This is a 5/8 inch OD by 0.12 wall, which makes the inside diameter about 3/8 of an inch. And so I had bought some drill bits and I tried to drill out a 2-inch section of this DOM to make it big enough to slide over the tie rods. And well, that wasn't working out very well. So I gave up on that and I found out that my buddy Justin has a lathe. So late last night I went over there. I cut out 2-inch sections of the DOM, took them over there, talked with him for a little bit, and we decided it would be best to go ahead and just part off the tie rods, all 4 of them, where I needed to part them off. And then for 1 inch of length on each one, we turned down that diameter to 3/8 of an inch. And that enabled us to slide each of them into that little section of tube. Drilled some holes in the tube, did some rosette welds, welded the outsides of each of the tubes, and then ground it down a bit on the belt sander, and then came back and painted it real quick. So that's all drying. That should be ready to go. You can see that it pretty closely matches the length of the original tie rods on the Festiva, which actually are working out pretty well for the side that I have still connected over here with the old tie rod. So the steering wheel is straight right now, the wheel is straight, so that's about the length that we need. And of course I left myself about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch to be able to turn those tie rods in further to shorten up the tie rods. And then we've got like 1.5 inches that we can turn the tie rod ends out to make them longer if need be. So this is all good to go, but before I go reinstalling them, I ran into another issue here. I got the boot off, and you can see down here in the steering rack, there's no bushing in there. So essentially I can grab this shaft here and just kind of move it around inside of the steering rack. Went online and I found some parts like an SPF 3450K or something like that. Ordered some of those because I found some of those on a different store that says they work on these Festiva racks. I also went ahead and ordered some Delrin rod. So in the event that those don't work out, we can take the Delrin over to my buddy's place. Again, thanks a ton, Justin. You really saved the day with that, and I really appreciate it. I definitely owe you one. So if those parts that I ordered don't work out, we can take that Delrin over to Justin's place and we can make custom steering rack bushings, or guides if you will, to fit inside of the steering rack. So before I go installing the tie rods, I really need to get that done because I don't want to put everything back together and have that steering rack really loose with no bushings or anything in there. So that's something else. I'm waiting on parts to show up. Now I need to start working on getting the condenser and the radiator in, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and end the video right here since it's getting kind of long. And something that's been really bugging me is that I try to make something happen and I work on something and I take parts apart and I remove stuff and I find out that I need more stuff to put it all back together. So I end up having to order parts and then wait for things to show up. And then the weekend comes and I can work on the car and I start working on it and I find out I need more parts. So I order more parts and then I have to wait for those parts to show up, and just it keeps going like that, which is why this video has taken so long to get out. I've been doing the work, but I feel like there's really just not enough content to put out a video until I get to a certain point. So I think we've made enough progress so far in this video, and while again I'm waiting on more parts to show up, I'll continue doing work on the car, I'll continue recording, and we can put all that in the next video. So until next time, I really appreciate everybody that's subscribed to the channel. I know it's been a while since I uploaded the last video, and I appreciate your patience. So thanks again. Y'all stay safe. You have a great week. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider clicking that subscribe button, sending me a thumbs up, leave me a comment down below. Anything helps. I really appreciate it. Y'all take care. All right. Bye.